going to talk about is covers a lot of different things. Like a lot of the things I'm going to talk about could probably just be a talk in and of themselves. So I'm going to try and give as much depth to make what I'm talking about comprehensible, but also enough breadth that you can kind of understand sort of the whole smorgasbord of topics that CORS covers here. So what I'm going to talk about, so here actually are the things I'm going to talk about here. So I'm going to talk about the same origin policy, the fetch API, which is a fairly recent, in the last couple of years, has replaced AJAX. I mean, it hasn't replaced it, AJAX is still around, but this is kind of where the W3C is putting its development efforts now. I'm going to talk about HTTP briefly, and then we'll get into like CORS and how to do Express. So that's the node part. So first thing to know is the web is made out of origins. Before I can talk to you about any kind of cross-origin research sharing, which is what CORS stands for, an origin, it's just a tuple of a protocol and a domain and a port. So a protocol is HTTP or HTTPS. Domain is whatever web domain name. And your port, usually optional, it's usually defaults to 443 or 80, depending on what kind of protocol you're, depending on which one you're using. So here is kind of the central problem that we're going to solve. So I'll set the stage here. You've got this web page, it's on foo.com, that you're running, and you want to talk to, you want to fetch another resource from the web. If there's another resource on foo.com, you can do that no problem. Your browser will just do that for you, it'll fetch it. If it's on some other .org, it will not fetch it because, as I mentioned, this is a different origin. So the same origin policy says foo.com can't really learn anything else. We try and limit the amount of information foo.com can learn at all about the web at large that's outside the origin of foo.com. So this is great. This is great news for you practically, because if you accidentally go to evil.example.com, if it tries to reach out and grab, gmail.com, mail.google.com, or whatever, it's not going to see your inbox. So that's briefly why it exists. So I'll also, I think this is the last thing. I'm going to talk about Fetch API. So Fetch API is a way of fetching resources. It is identical in functionality to AJAX. Like, I assume most people here know what AJAX is. You may know what fetch is. So it's also bound by the same origin policy. Same origin policy covers a lot of things. It covers iframes. It covers fetching things. And this API, I could, or someone else could, give a talk about this. But briefly, this is how you use it. You're just like, hey, I want to get some URL.foo. And then you do a .then, and then run the response through another function, and then you run the result of that through another function. This is a promise API, which, again, could also be a third talk all by itself. So I'm not going to get into this too much. I'm just going to say, like, this is how you would read a JSON file from somewhere else on the web. And if you don't control some URL.foo, then you can't read it unless this website is going to use CORS. So CORS is an HTTP header. And like, even if you've done some web development, like I did web development like as a student for years, and I didn't really know what HTTP was. I was like, I type in a URL, a website shows up, like I'm making it look good, whatever. I didn't really understand this, so I'll just give a really brief primer on what HTTP is. So HTTP is a protocol for requesting and delivering web content. It's like when you have the website that you got, that's like the package, that's like what's in the package of HTTP. That's the HTTP present, already unwrapped and rendered on your screen. What the packaging is around it is requests and responses. So your browser sends out a request, and I'll show what this looks like on the next slide, and the server sends back a response, and both requests and responses have headers, which are key value pairs that say things like what data types are involved. Is it JSON? Is it binary? Is it XML? Whatever. Or what size it is. Like how big is this web page going to be? How much memory should I allocate? Like these are important things that computers need to know. And so then below the headers is the body. That's the actual web page. That's what gets rendered after you've read through all the headers. A request can also have a body. Like if you're uploading something, you might need to send a request body. Sometimes requests do not have bodies. If you're just like, get me this URL, please. Requests. So something that's unique to a request is it has a method, which is, if you've done some web development, these might look familiar to you. Get, post, delete, put. There's a couple other ones, options, head. And a response has a response code. Some of these you might know. 200 is success. 404, probably the most famous one, not found. 500 means there was an internal system error, like it tried to process the request, and there was something crashed, and it spat back a 500. So that's HTTP. This is what you don't see when you're browsing the web, but makes it possible for you to request stuff and get stuff back. So here is what you actually see. This is what actually gets sent across the wire. So you've got your method up here, also called your verb, your path. This is just asking for a slash. This could be a whole long URL string. On the response side, you've got your 200. That means it was successful. There's all kinds of other stuff, what date it is. E-tag is a caching thing. Like, you might already have the web page, so you could say like, hey, I have a web page that like has this hash. If you have it, don't bother sending me a new one. Just say I have it already. So that's the kind of things that HTTP can talk about. So I say all of this to get back to CORS, to get back to my headline at the top. CORS, that is cross-origin resource sharing, is just a specification of headers. So you've got to understand headers if you're going to understand really anything about CORS. So here's how a web page fetch looks like. So now we're going to get into where CORS actually happens. So a web page uses the fetch API, or uses AJAX. And that is a call to the browser, the software. So like this is a script running the page. This is JavaScript. And JavaScript asks the browser saying, hey, can you do a network request for me, please? And then the browser does the network request. And it sends it to the server. And the server sends back whatever response it's going to send back. And then this is where simple CORS happen. We'll talk about non-simple after this. But this is where the simplest form of CORS happens. It's literally called the simple request. I'm not making that up or ad-libbing that. That's literally what the spec calls it. So right here, this question mark, is does the browser, so all of this definitely happens. Like it actually hits the server actually sends something back across the wire, and then the server has to decide, do I need to let this web page view it, or should I withhold it? So like, for example, if this web page is an evil web page trying to view my Gmail inbox, it might say, hey, wait a minute, this is Gmail. The script that requested it is not from mail.google.com. No, you don't get to see it. Or it might say, yes, it is from the same origin, so I will allow it to see it. Or it could say, it's not from the same origin, but it did serve headers that indicate that the server wished for this to be readable. So the server, so again, the right-hand side of that diagram, can send back something that says, dear browser, please ignore the same origin policy with this response. Whoever requested this, or if it's from this specific origin, you can specify an origin, specific origin, or you can say anybody can read this. So it says who can read this. So don't use the default rules, use the rules that I'm specifying right now in this response header. So the simplest response header is called access control allow origin, and we'll see that in practice in just a second. And that's a way of saying if the request comes from a page on whatever origin the value of this header is, then it may read this. Otherwise, don't allow it to be read. You can also use the wildcard star instead of specifying a specific origin. Okay, so we'll look at a demo real quick. So we're going to look at some So here we go. This is server-side code. So actually right now I'm using a service called REPL.it. Definitely check this out. If you have not used it, it is actually a super awesome service. I am not affiliated with REPL.it whatsoever. I kind of wish I were, because it's really cool. So I'm actually having them run this Express server for me right now. Yep. Yep. Let me see what I can do here for you. So I think this is probably, yeah, is this readable? All right, cool. So if you haven't used Express before, I'll just go over briefly what's going on here. So we're requiring Express. If you don't know how to install Express, look up npm. I'm going to assume some familiarity with the Node environment. But so you've got Express, and then you define your app with Express, and then you can just start defining endpoints. You can say, hey, when I get a GET request on the root, do this. And the functions that here are request. The function here has arguments that are request and response. In other words, what's coming into the server and what I'm going to send out of the server. And then I'll talk about actually what this is in the next section. So here we're saying response.end. .end is the same as .send. There's also a .send function, but .send doesn't terminate the connection. End says just send this, and now we're done. We're not going to say anything else. You can do an end of file and just be done with it. So this is just sending this web page that's loading here. And we're defining two endpoints here. One called CORS on and one called CORS off. And the difference is that they both send JSON. So they both send this JSON with an MSG object, an object with an MSG key in it. The difference is the CORS on endpoint calls response.set, access control allow origin star. So we'll flip over to this. So just so you know, this is from example.com. Sorry, what you're looking at right now is the Chrome DevTools. I have a console open in Chrome DevTools, and it is open from example.com. So that's going to be our requesting origin here. So let me grab this URL. So we're going to say fetch CORS server /CORS off. Here's what happens when you request an origin from example.com to this REPL.co URL, and there's no CORS headers involved. Send that, and we get a big error message that says, hey, it's been blocked by CORS policy. There was no access control allow origin header. And we can jump over to the network tab and look at that, and we can confirm. So if you jump over to the network tab in Chrome, by the way, you can pull this up if you don't know. Probably you do, but you can push F12 or Control-Shift-J will do it. Just in case anybody here has not used Chrome DevTools. So again, we ran this script, did this fetch, and the fetch actually happened. So you can actually see the response. Oh, no, actually you can't see the response. Sorry, I tell a lie. You can actually see the response headers though. You can tell there was a response because it actually says like, well, here's what I got back, and you can see indeed there is no access control allow origin header. So the browser blocked it. Now, if we go to CORS on, so we'll do the exact same request with the one, and then, hey, this time I actually can see the response. The script can actually see it. And if we jump over here and look at this request, we can see from the response headers, there it is. It's the first one because it's alphabetical. You get this star. And also, here is one from Enable CORS. So this is another DevTools window I have open that's from a different origin. I can, so instead of saying this, instead of saying star, I can say HTTPS example.com and rerun that. Let me wait for the server to reboot. Okay, it's rebooted. So over here, in this one, which is the example.com window, we run that, again, still success, exactly the same. If we jump over to enable CORS, we can run that exact same code, and we get an error message. Because before, actually, we didn't have one at all, and it just said no access control origin header is present. And here, now it says there is an access control origin header, but it's for example.com, and that is not equal to our supplied origin of enablecors.org. So I just say this so you can get familiar with the error messages. Like, if you ever have problems with CORS and you post like on Stack Overflow, and you're like, hey, I'm trying to do this, why isn't my CORS working? I guarantee you, if you have not done it, the first comment you're going to get is people being like, can you share what your request and your response headers look like? So you're going to get that from DevTools, go to the Network tab, click on this, and just copy this straight into your Stack Overflow post. That will save everyone a lot of time. Okay, so this is our
search example.com just to, because at the end is,
yeah.
so the star earlier was the, like, you change those, and it says Windows example.com.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I got it.
So I mean, I'm on rebel.it. So the origin you specify in this response is who is allowed to see it.
And then you start.
Yeah, the star means anybody, and then I change it to example.com, and then I show example.com can read it, but then anybody else can. The browser says, well, there is CORS involved, but it's not for you.
So like when
Exactly. And actually, I'll show you in a minute, you can have a function decide whether or not, so you can dynamically decide what to make this header. So you could be like, if the origin is one of these allowed domains, then go ahead and mirror back the domain, or mirror back the origin. You'd be like, I'll allow Google and I'll allow Facebook to read this API, and nobody else is allowed to read this API. So I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Okay, so jumping back into slides for just a second. All right, so turns out like doing header tweaking is really annoying. So there's a modality in Express called middleware. Middleware in Express is any function that's registered to run when processing an incoming HTTP request. So you can have like a whole assembly line of middlewares. So you can be like incoming request, and then you could be like check if the user is logged in, check if the user has a European IP address, like check what geographically where that IP address is coming from. And one of the things you can do is add CORS headers. You can do like whatever API, whatever endpoint we're hitting, doesn't matter, or you can even say selectively, like if it's one of these endpoints, run it through this middleware, slap on the appropriate CORS headers, move it along, get onto whatever the endpoint is supposed to do. So you can really modularize this task. And there is, somebody has already done it for you. It's like the motto of your programming, I guess. There is a module called CORS. You can do npm install CORS, and that is Express middleware for adding CORS headers. And here, and you add middlewares by just using the .use function. You'll see this model all over the place. If you look at any middleware, it's going to look like this. You're going to say app.use this middleware. And there's a CORS function, and the CORS function takes an object that has parameters. So here we're saying you're allowing enable CORS.org. And as you can see, like I don't have, so to jump back to previously,
I manually said, okay, when we handle CORS.on, we'll set this header. Here, we're not setting the header, and it will still work. So I'll jump over to my enable CORS tab. I'll copy the URL. Works, and just for comparison, we'll jump over to the example.com one, and that's blocked because I specified enable CORS because I was using it. So that's exactly what we expected. But again, it's really nice because like I didn't have to specify it. I could make dozens of endpoints, and I wouldn't need to say every single time, yes, enable CORS for this endpoint, yes, enable CORS for this endpoint. Because this app.use means before control flow has filtered down to any of these functions that decide what to do at CORS.on or what to do at root or whatever, it has already been through a little function that assigns CORS headers appropriately. So I'll show. So you can also make this a function. Yeah. You can also give it a function. Instead of specifying a literal string, we'll say, here's a function that takes an origin and dynamically decides whether or not it will allow it. And because with Node.js, this is a pattern that you probably have seen, and you always put the error first so that you don't forget it. It's just like anybody who makes an API in Node will do this. So we're passing in a null error because there is no error. And we will say yes. So here is a very simple function that just unilaterally says yes. No matter what origin you pass in, it's allowed. You can also say if I could also say origin nope, that doesn't work. Oh well. I'm not going to look at string again. I will do. Okay, well, hold on. Yeah, that is on the right. I could do that. Hold on, let me make sure this works at all. Let me just try this here. No, I'm writing now. So here, I'll write something that is completely pointless. I'll write something that arbitrarily decides at a coin toss whether or not to allow CORS. So as you can see, sometimes it's allowed, sometimes it's not. I just want to show you this to show you can have programmatic decisions about whether or not to allow it. This is just like the stupidest, most arbitrary way to make that decision. But it's running fully language, so go nuts. All right. So I will. Yeah, you know what? I'll just keep this here. I'm keeping these examples so you can look at them later. So I'll just keep it in this state. All right. Jump back. Any questions about the middleware model? Cider function here? Okay. So far, okay, great. We get to look at non-simple requests. Awesome, love it. All right, so I'm going to look at simple requests. So I'm going to actually define what simple request is. A simple request is a really, really specific subset of requests. And it's, you don't need to memorize this, but just give you a simple request can use one of these three HTTP methods, get, post, or head. And it only has these specific request headers. Except in language, content language, last event ID, I don't even know what that is, but and content type has to be one of these three. Notably, JSON big types are omitted. If you want to do JSON stuff, it's going to be a non-simple request. So that's exactly what we'll look at in our next example. So first I'll talk about what happens when you do a non-simple request. I showed that diagram way back where I was like, this is what a simple request is, non-simple is different. So non-simple requests still work with CORS, but you have to do something called a pre-flight request. Before you actually send the request, like you use the fetch API to be like, get me file X from origin, whatever, give me like google.com/google. And before it will actually contact that endpoint, it does a pre-flight request. So consider this. Consider we handle them like simple requests. Imagine like any HTTP method was allowed. So the website says, hey browser, give me this URL. Turns out the URL it's asking for is it wants to do a delete method on the /everything, whatever, it's something terrible. That'll do some kind of destructive operation on the server that falls well outside of this specification. So again, you only allow these three verbs. So it's trying to do a delete verb on the server. Imagine if the server was just like, yeah, cool, I'll do that. When it gets back here, the decision, like the number 4, like, oh, but do we let the script see the response from the server? It doesn't matter. It already sent the delete verb to the server. So what we do first is it says, hey, I want to fetch this. So instead of actually sending it, it asks the server, may I send a request? I'm going to have this method, and it's going to use these headers. Is that allowed? And then the server sends back a bunch of headers saying, here are verbs I allow, and here are headers I allow. And then the server says, okay, should I send this or not? If it looks like it's a match, then I'll send it, because the server just said, yes, delete verbs are fine. Then I'll send it. Or if it said, no, I only allow the standard simple verbs, then it'll say, sorry, I'm not going to send a delete. Okay, so we will go to this one. So this is a fun little server I made that has an incredibly simple API. It has a get/list where it will show you what's in this. It just maintains a list of stuff. You can ask for what the list is. You can add something to the list with a post request. You can also delete things by name by doing list/whatever with the delete method. So I believe I have turned CORS on. Yeah, I just universally. By the way, you can just do this. I know I specified arguments before. If you just do this, it means just CORS. Everything has CORS. Etc. Okay, so example.com. Let me grab this URL. Oh, you know what? I probably have it in my history here. Cool. So we're just going to do this get. If you don't specify a verb for fetch, it'll just use get by default. Maybe I messed this up. What's that? Oh no, it did. It was just taking time. Just the network was because Rebel.it is a free service, sometimes it takes a second for the server to go, oh,
you from something that's not a given French?
Oh, great question. You're actually about to see that. Perfectly timed question. Here is what a post request looks like.
Oh, I knew
So you specify a second argument to fetch. So fetch first takes the whole URL that you're asking for, and then you can give it this object with a bunch of keys that say how the request should be made. So one thing you can say is method, so method post. You can also specify request headers. Here I'm saying I expect to get back a JSON. Actually, I always forget if that means there's an outgoing JSON or an incoming JSON response. I don't know. Somebody is screaming at the computer right now with the right answer is. I'm sorry. And so we're going to send this JSON object. So this is a string that is in JSON format that describes an object with a key called name and value called mark. We're going to send that, and it says, hey, I did it. I added this object. Again, we can do this because CORS is turned on. And then we can do the request, hey, and it's there. And we can rerun it, add another line. And make one called foo. And, yep, there we go. They're both in there. There's a list of objects. Oh, but I forgot to show you what actually happened on the network level there. So I'm just going to rerun those because there's a lot on the network log. So just for clarity's sake, I will run get, and then I will run a post. Take as long as I get rid of those. So here we go. So we only made 2 requests since I cleared this network log, but you can see there's 3 here. So one is this get, and okay, it's got the rollout origin, so my work. And we can see here's an options request that I did not make, but the browser made for me. And the mode I was using the CORS middleware in, it just says any verb, all the verbs, they're all allowed. And the request, oh, and allow headers. So it said yes, content type was allowed. We were like, wait, how did it know I was going to ask for that content type? I should have shown you the request first. Here's what actually came into the server. It sends access control request method and access control request headers. So those are ways of saying how we do that that exchange. This is the actual technical look at may I send a request that looks like this. It's saying may I send a request in a second that uses a post method, and may I send a request that has a non-standard or a non-simple content type header. And the server came back and said, yes, it's allowed. I allow these headers and I allow these methods. So then immediately afterwards, we have the actual post request. Anyway, I just wanted to show you what it actually looks like going down the wire. The really nice thing is that this CORS middleware really does abstract away a lot of that stuff. Like if you really wanted to say like, yes, just definitely CORS it up, you can just use CORS and it'll permissively allow whatever. If you don't want to allow every single one, by the way, there's one other way to use middleware. There's probably a lot of other ways to use middleware too. But you can say, you can actually just supply it as another argument to the endpoint definition. You say the endpoint is at the file root and it uses CORS. Like run this first, then this. So get actually supports a list of functions. So this CORS is a function, but actually it returns a function as well. It is itself a function. So it returns value. And it knows. So sorry, you can supply a list of these. You can just paste as many of these as you want. obviously doing CORS together again doesn't make any sense, but you could have multiple middlewares for this specific endpoint. But we had defined previously the app.use, which is a way of saying every single endpoint, no exceptions, gets CORS. So, yeah.
So is use run compile order with that with this, or did you want to just X number of endpoints in this group with not
That's a really good question. The advice that I saw was don't define any handlers prior to use, which actually makes me suspect the answer to that is yes, because most people would probably be like, that's kind of a clunky way to decide what gets what. But I think it probably would work. I don't know. I will refrain from making an absolute statement on that. Actually, we can find out, but I'm not going to find out right now. But actually, I'm curious about that, but I'm not going to find out right now. Great question. Cool. All right. Oh yeah, and then we got to do the delete. So, sure. Okay, cool. I'll just show what the delete looks like real quick, and then we'll actually turn it off to show what a misconfigured server might do. So we're going to do a delete, we're going to delete foo, and then we'll rerun our get, and as you can see, it's just bar and egg right there, and the foo has been deleted. What we could do is we could say methods. So one of the parameters that CORS supports is methods. We can say I only support get post. Relaunch this. See what it looks like when you don't get permission from the server to do this. So we run. Okay, we just deployed the server. The list is empty, so we gotta pull it back up. Put egg in there. Okay, so we got a list of things. Now we're going to delete it. So just like I did before, say, and then, hey, this is not allowed. So as you expect, it says it's not allowed by access control allow methods. So it's actually really nice. I know the message is like kind of long and a lot to parse, but it actually gives you pretty specific feedback. Like, I needed to see an access control allow methods response that included delete, and I did not see that, so I could not allow this. And as you can see down here, so like, here we have our options pre-flight for our post, and then we do our post, and that happens, we get, and here we only have this is from earlier. Here we only have the options request, and no, that's the end of the list. You can't tell, but I'm trying to scroll down. There's nothing, there's nothing below that because there was no actual request. The pre-flight ran, and then it said, based on the feedback I got from the pre-flight, I am not greenlighting this request. So that's how a CORS pre-flight works. There's also a whole thing about credentials that I'm not going to get into because I would need to make a server and I did not prepare that. But one thing you should know if you're actually going to use CORS in production, you need to specifically allow credentials. So if you're going to allow credentials requests that use a user's cookies, you need to, there's another header for that. There's like an access control allow credentials cookie. Otherwise, if you don't get that, then it'll say, hey, I tried, you wanted me to send cookies for this request, and the server said I could not send cookies, so I'm reporting this request. But again, that is another thing that's like